Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here in just a bit. We'll just wait for a few more people to come in. Welcome. And you'll see we are recording this conversation. So if you would prefer not to be recorded, you can turn your camera off. We do record the speaker view. So you should have a OK button to press there. Welcome. All right, so it's 4:02. I think we can get started. Welcome to Messy Conversations, another week. This week we'll be talking about race and gentrification in LA specifically, and we have two great, very knowledgeable guests. Unfortunately, one of our guests, Damian Goodman, felt ill today and is not able to make it, but we're going to have a really great conversation with two people who are expert on this topic. I'm Asa Wilder. I'm on the Messy Conversations planning team, and a couple of announcements and just kind of ground rules before we get started. You're not a regular here. We do Messy Conversations most Mondays at 4 p.m. At this link. And next week, we'll be talking about voting rights issues with Professor Sonia R. Jarvis, our guest. Should be a really great topic, very timely, and very knowledgeable guest on that as well. We ask that as the conversation takes place, if you have questions and comments, you can post them in the chat, and we'll try to keep track of those and bring them up later once we open it up to the Q&A. And I believe that covers kind of all the ground rules. So I will turn to our guests. First, Erin Aubry Kaplan, who you may know, journalist and author, has been writing about race and politics and culture and identity since 1992. Contributes regularly to the New York Times and Los Angeles Times, and in 2007 became the first African-American weekly opinion columnist in that paper's history. In addition to teaching literature and writing for the Bridge program at INEOC, has also taught in the MFA writing program and is author of 2 books, I believe, unless missing that, and a resident of Inglewood. Hi, Erin, welcome.
Thanks, Asa. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we also have Jane Paul, who you may know, also teaches at AULA in the undergraduate urban studies concentration, as well as in the urban sustainability program, master's program. And she is teaching, researching, writing, and developing curriculum on the solidarity economy and human rights. She was an environmental policy consultant focused on the green economy and economic justice, has led green initiatives at the Green LA Coalition and a number of organizations developing environmental policy in the city of LA. Was previously a commissioner and vice chairperson on the City of LA's Rent Adjustment Commission, appointed by the mayor from 2014 to 2020. And Jane reached out with an idea to have this conversation. I was so excited. It's a really great, important topic, and I'm so happy we have such experts on it. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, Jane, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Asa, and thank you to this committee who's been doing this, putting together these messy conversations for quite a long time. I want to say a couple of years now. They are invariably fascinating and beautiful and important. So we all, I think, can give you a lot of gratitude. So as Asa mentioned, Damien Goodman cannot be here today. He's not feeling well, so that is a bummer for him. We'll miss him and hopefully can have him as a guest another time. So gentrification, race and gentrification is our topic. I think most of the people in this room could acknowledge that we have this long-term struggle for equity, for democracy, for justice, and that's even more evident as we look around at the current conditions of housing in particular, but of looking broadly at ownership, at wealth, and at land use. So we try to look at the big conditions initially in a conversation. Colonialism, oppression, deeply ingrained racism, those things have really stolen economic opportunity, stolen our gathering places and our places of self-shelter, safe shelter from many communities. But the fight for the right to thrive is more powerful today than ever before. So our honored guest, Erin Aubry Kaplan, is an articulate frontline warrior in this battle. So I think we should just go. Erin, should we get started?
Yeah, go.
Great. All right. So the first question is, and we may be sort of structured and we may not. We're going to see how this goes today. So we do all, I think, have a good idea of what gentrification and displacement mean in Los Angeles. We read a lot about it and see a lot about it. We see rampant real estate speculation, eviction crises, segregated ownership, and rising rents. But the question, Erin, is, just to personalize it, what does that challenge look like more intimately for you and what you consider to be your Southern California community?
Okay, thanks, Danny. Well, you know what? I'm not an expert in gentrification, only in my current situation and my lived experience. So let me just clarify. I think gentrification is a euphemism for what I call white return. I'm being just objective. Like where I live in Inglewood, like other Black places in Los Angeles, of which there are increasingly few, they were always, most of Los Angeles was whites only, or kind of just by tradition. And where I live in Inglewood, it was very white until the 1960s, until the unrest in 1965. And it's crazy to think it's been 30 years since 1992, almost to the day, right? But before that, there was 1965 and the Watts unrest. That triggered a whole flight of white folks out of Los Angeles, including everywhere from Compton to South Central to Linwood, places like that. And so Black people infilled, became the population. It was interesting because in the 60s, just as things started to open up, the housing segregation was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1948. So Blacks had started to move into formerly white areas. It was not overnight, but suddenly it's like pushing on a door. Suddenly the white people leave and the door falls open. And so South Central and Inglewood, places like that, became more and more Black. Not because there was a great willingness to integrate, but because there was flight. People just voted with their feet and left. They got very afraid of what Watts meant, not just Watts, but that Black people everywhere were a threat to property values everywhere. That's a terrible echo of what Martin Luther King was saying about justice everywhere. But anyway, that's really the perception blew up about what a good neighborhood was, like where we don't want to live, where those dangerous Negroes are. And so that happened overnight, although that started to happen after 1948, after the Supreme Court struck down the racial housing covenants that kept LA and other cities segregated. The flight started to happen. But in 1965, it got totally accelerated. So now in 2022, and actually for the last, 10 years or so, there's what I call white return. People are tired of moving out to the suburbs or to the Inland Empire, wherever. And, we're seeing more and more white, non-Black and brown people moving into what is traditionally, at least for the last 40, 50 years, Black areas. That is what's happening. I will say that I got my start in journalism really in 1992 after the unrest. The LA Times realized it wasn't covering communities of color very well. So that's how I got started really reporting on and commenting on and sort of telling the narrative of the community where I live, where I grew up. And so I wrote for years about after 92, there was sort of this great impetus to, build back better. What does the community want in terms of housing and development and all these things? Nothing really happened. Nothing came to fruition, honestly. Wheels did not start moving until the gentrification got intense. And suddenly, when white people show up, suddenly you have Trader Joe's and Starbucks, and you have discussions about improvement. And race follows development. It's very intertwined. And that's been my frustration to see that that truly there is not a lot of interest in a neighborhood until or unless it becomes white. And that's just a hard American reality. And so at this point, the question is, are we going to repeat history? Are we going to re-gentrify these areas? And by the way, Black Los Angeles is much smaller now than it was in 1992. South Central Los Angeles is down to about 20%. Inglewood is right at, 50-50. Inglewood might be the last significantly Black place in LA County, actually. But the question is, are we going to do the same thing? Or are we going to do something different? I mean, there's a lot of complications here. I'm not against an integrated community. We all believe in the beloved community, right? Martin Luther King believed in it too, but gentrification is not integration. Gentrification is, like Jane said, it's displacement. It's these property values that go so high that they bar pretty much anybody of color from coming in. So economics and race, follow each other. So I will say I have hope for Crenshaw specifically because I look at Crenshaw and Leimert Park, and it's changing, and it's been changing for a long time. However, there seems to be a real vested interest by all people in Crenshaw for it to be a Black neighborhood. Now that would be a really interesting outcome. That it would be less Black, but still a Black place, and that would be its identity, and that would be its brand, and that would be its attraction, and it would still prosper. It still requires other folks moving there for that to happen, it seems like, but it could be a new model. And so I'm sorry Damien's not here to talk about that, but that's where I think we are. And in Inglewood, gentrification is happening, but more slowly, I think, than it has happened in Crenshaw. But it's happening ostensibly because of the SoFi Stadium. Although why anybody would want to live next to that stadium, I don't know. It's a traffic nightmare. As a resident, I can tell you it does not improve the quality of my life at all. That's a whole other discussion we can have in this discussion. But it's interesting how, SoFi Stadium fell out of the sky, and then we were told this is going to change your life, and this is what you have been waiting for. It is not. Inglewood is a small city that cannot sustain SoFi Stadium and the Intuit Dome, which is being built as we speak, down the street from SoFi, and it is a huge burden for residents, and no one talks about that. All we hear is, we are coming to save you. The stadium will coming to save you, you people. Anyway, let me get off my soapbox. But that is how I see gentrification in LA. And yes, do we want our property values to go up? Yeah, sure. I'd like to be sitting on top of $1 million, but I'm not moving. So this is all just numbers on paper to me. But the fact of the matter is, I don't want crazy housing prices to cut off the development of a community that is disappearing, really. Inglewood is a working class city that should remain so. It is not Beverly Hills, thank God. And it needs to be, we need places in Los Angeles that are accessible and livable and affordable. I don't even know what affordable means anymore. Jane can talk about that, So we are, oh, that was interesting. So anyway, we're still in the middle of it all, right? So I think I'll stop there as an opening sort of salvo and throw it back to you, Jane.
Okay, all right, so great, so much there to talk about. So I love that idea of white return, because I think most of us are familiar with the white flight expression, right? And we've been seeing how communities across the country and across the world really, but across our country, people can talk about Oakland or talk about New York or Brooklyn or my hometown, Brooklyn, and how much they've changed. And so there is the white flight and then white return thing. There's also the looming speculative real estate market, which has driven displacement and homelessness really across the globe, like from Johannesburg to Barcelona to Rio de Janeiro to here, down the street. So speculation is part of this, as you said, recolonizing, right? That's not the word you used, but it's really driving this affordability crisis. And so so what's interesting, and maybe this speaks to what you're asking about, could we do something different? So we're seeing more really anti-capitalist, community-based advocacy and activist work that's intentional. It's recent. The pandemic's highlighted how our current economy is not working for folks. And so how does this jive with or not align with strengthen these housing rights and land use rights efforts?
How does that well, well, I mean, that can only help. Because to be anti-capitalist is to be pro-equity, right? And pro redistribution of wealth, I think. So I think that dovetails perfectly. I'm really glad that's happening. That's the overarching movement. And that's important. I think people really need to understand, though, that, I mean, we do understand it, but we don't really, it's kind of an abstract, not to me, but for a lot of other folks, that race and capitalism go together, but so do race and land value. There is truly a price. There was truly a price. I think I can't think of who it was, maybe it was Richard Rothstein, who called it a white tax. If you live in a neighborhood that's predominantly white, it could be kind of down at the, it could be not the greatest place, but it's going to be more expensive, more desirable, more everything than a place that's primarily Black. I realized in a piece I wrote for a magazine called Red Canary that it just struck me. When Black people moved into South Central and Crenshaw, which were all white before they were Black, those places were very desirable. But when Black people moved there, and they were very middle class, like a lot of people who moved there, they were more affluent maybe than the white people who moved out, right? But it didn't matter. If you're a Black person living in a predominantly Black neighborhood, say Ladera Heights, which is actually quite mixed, but anyway, people see it as a Black neighborhood. It's not considered desirable. It's a Black neighborhood first, and that determines its value. And it's going to be always, always, always of lower value than a similar neighborhood of other colors. Even a neighborhood that's not nearly as nice. I think of Culver City, which was, sorry, Antioch, but anyway, Culver City, which was a backwater for most of my life in Los Angeles. It was kind of nowhere on the map, but it became part of the West Side. Suddenly, it became a hot, but because of the housing shortage in LA, but it's just like instantly because of the demographics. In LA now, of course, everything's overpriced. There shouldn't be houses in Inglewood shouldn't be $800,000, but that's on the low end, and that is that is low on the scale of LA real estate. But anyway, I just wanted to just reemphasize that, to be anti-capitalist is great, to be pro redistribution is great, but it's almost like we need to redistribute the wealth that we allocate to race. And I don't know how we do that. How do we make people more valuable? That's really the question to me.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people don't say capitalism, they say racial capitalism.
Okay.
But it depends, but it is in our country certainly the case. And I just want to ping that you mentioned Richard Rothstein's books. So Richard Rothstein wrote a book a few years ago called The Color of Law. If y'all are not familiar with it, it's about those laws and covenants that Erin talked about, that were struck down, that said who can live where. So many of our Los Angeles communities were off limits to people of color and people who essentially were not Christian. So no Jews and certainly no Black people. And while they were struck down, I believe in 48, not to get too wonky, I think many of the covenants actually stayed on the books through the 1960s. And since that's the way in America that people have acquired wealth, intergenerational wealth, between that and the redlining of banking, and that there were no loans available to people, even GI loans, Black people now, we're talking many generations, have had no opportunity to accumulate wealth the way white people have. And it's most evident in land use and housing.
Right.
I just want to say one thing about that Damian Goodman's work, and that is that he's, thank you, Jackie, that he is working on, and has been for many years, working on this downtown Crenshaw project, where a group of people who live in Crenshaw wanted to buy the mall, the Baldwin
Hills Crenshaw Plaza, yeah.
Thank you. And brought together an amazing coalition and did impactful work to raise the money and get a brilliant design, and take a space that would be that would prioritize Black owned and locally owned businesses, but also build community centers and have spaces for nonprofit organizations and for worker-owned cooperatives. And there is something that happens in a neighborhood where people are not only physically displaced, but their culture and ancestry is stolen. And so I don't know if we talked about that before, Erin, so I hope it's okay for me to bring this up, because, we see only these teeny pockets where culture and ancestry are allowed to thrive. And it takes away from people's well-being, as well as housing, as well as not being able to run a small business in your own community. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Oh, no, I think you're right. I think, and I've watched over the years since I started reporting in 92. And as I said earlier, there was a lot of discussion about what does the community want in there, in Crenshaw, for example, which had a lot of burnt out sites, but there was an opportunity to really figure out, like, what do we want? It was this great sort of movement of self-determination. But development intervenes, and development is development. And what Damian was trying to do, and still trying to do, frankly, with downtown Crenshaw, is to disrupt that same old model of, and this is where it gets complicated. Many African-American people I know, including people in Crenshaw after 92, said, okay, we want this neighborhood to be on a level with all other neighborhoods, that have other amenities. So everybody wanted a Trader Joe's, and everybody wanted a, sit down restaurant, and they wanted jobs, all these things. Those things typically, they come from the outside. You have to lure Trader Joe's, or you have to, you can't make these businesses come. And they didn't come, by the way. So what Damian was trying to do was to say, okay, forget these big developers like Hagen, who owned the mall, who got $1 million tax breaks just to open that mall in the first place. That was Tom Bradley's doing. But Damian was trying to introduce a new model, which is, yes, we're going to have this mall. It's not just going to be these retailers who will come and come or not come, or we kind of just wait with bated breath for things to happen. We're going to own the mall. Number one, we're going to own it. And then we can really have the power and the leeway to bring in what we need to see, what would grow our community. Also, he wasn't against the Trader Joe's and Victoria's Secret or whatever. But there's more to development than that. There's more to improvement than just what I call, retail justice, you know, if there is such a thing. And that was a huge effort. It's not unprecedented, I don't think, Jane. Maybe you can speak to that. I think this is not something brand new. There are models of this, I think, on the East Coast. But Damien, you know, it's amazing what he has brought together. People, I mean, they had a very specific plan with very impressive funding. And yet the mall owners, the fund that's basically managing the mall, would not even entertain the bid, would not even sit down and have a discussion or conversation. That to me says a lot about development and traditional development. So this is what downtown Crenshaw was trying to disrupt. But they came to the table with the requisite, you know, credentials. And still, we're not, quote unquote, taken seriously. And so that's been the problem. But I am, as someone who's covered just so much community discussion about what to do next, I was and still am very excited by what downtown Crenshaw represents for the future.
Thank you. Yeah, so it is exciting, and I don't know exactly what their structure is, but we talked it for a minute before you all joined about in a lot of neighborhoods in Los Angeles that have similar crises, that there are more and more community land trusts. So that's a way that ownership is held with the people. A community land trust means that the land and or the buildings on it are owned collectively, and generally, whether it's commercial or residential, held as affordable in perpetuity. And so community land trusts actually started with Black farmers who had their own circumstances of not being able to acquire land, not being able to get loans from banks. And so that's that's another meeting. Maybe we can have that one. But that idea of ownership and decision-making also has to do with Erin's point about self-determination. And
that Damien, I just want to add Damien's own history. He's a 7th generation Angelino, I think, but his great grandfather ran a Black-owned bank, Liberty Savings and Loan, I think, in Los Angeles. And so he's part of a history of Black to self-determination in Los Angeles. He's trying to do it post so-called integration. His family did it pre-integration, but so there is a narrative there that is also, I think, impressive.
Yeah, and inspiring.
Yes.
So you know, because it's really easy to despair. People talk about climate despair. We could talk about land and housing despair. But we don't want to. We want to talk about, you know, what's hopeful. So I have 2 questions, Erin, whichever one you want. One is, I wonder if we want to talk for a minute about what did happen after 1992, when there were all theoretically a whole boatload of efforts that were going to fix all of the problems. That's one question. Then the other question is maybe after that, or whatever you want to do, about these collective efforts in general, like what else is happening?
Well, after 92, I was pretty naive then. I thought, okay, people have learned the lesson. We're all woke, right? I thought we were all woke in 92. What did I know? I thought we had seen not just the problems of police brutality, of course, but the whole underlying frustration and anger about injustice and about insufficient progress and racial progress and all that. So there was a flurry of efforts. I think the one that got the most attention was Rebuild LA. Peter Uberoth coordinated that at the behest of Tom Bradley, and that was going to be, that was going to galvanize business interest in South Central and development. Yeah. Now, in the 90s, what else? The background, what was going on was there was higher crime. People, saw the rise of gangs. There was crack cocaine. People saw were frightened away from investing, or that's what the line was. And Peter Uberoth found, I don't know exactly what went on with Rebuild LA, but I think that, like I said earlier, attracting business and serious development, not just a store here, a store there, a Starbucks here, a Starbucks there, but serious infrastructure kind of development, like, a place, industry, jobs that, that would actually pay people. That just, I don't know. I think it clearly, it's not going to happen overnight, but there just was no traction on it, and frankly, and then later on in the mid '90s was a recession, which not didn't I don't think it was nearly as bad as the recession that came after in 2008. But anyway, it just was another reason. Oh, we can't do this. It's not the right time. Martin Luther King has a whole speech about a whole philosophy about, it's never the right time, right? And American politicians will always say, we can't afford it. That became the big kind of rationale. Well, we just can't afford it. And I think that's still actually what people say. It just costs too much. But look what it's cost us to not do it. So, I mean, that's what, unfortunately after 92, there were some things that were institutions that were built though, that are still around. I think the Vermont Slauson Economic Development Corporation is still around. There are a few, more than a few things got started are still around, but the kind of core development, the core progress that people really wanted to see just didn't happen. And I think because it was mostly Black folks and increasingly brown folks, just didn't happen. And people just really they really perceived the neighborhoods as not being worthy of investment. Too much crime, too much, just not a good bet, literally. So I think it's a problem also in the media. The media, I put the LA Times in this category, did not do a good job of telling the story of people and the reality on the ground. And they kind of just went along with the pretty negative kind of perception of South Central and Black neighborhoods generally. So, and what was your second part? What was the second part of the question, or that you?
Well, so I'll ask you that in a minute about the collective efforts. So, but I do want to say that you're being kind to the political system of Los Angeles, because first of all, we didn't have very many politicians of color, Yahoo for Tom Bradley, but we didn't really have politicians who had either a personal or other political stake, even in the neighborhood, right? Everybody was on their way to some other job. And so political will is critical, right? You can have buckets of money, but there you need legislation and you need planners. And we could ask Dr. Gills to talk about that probably at length, to create the things that a community needs after those things were overtly taken away, right? Yeah. So the neighborhood struggled because they were abandoned by the system, right? Ruthie Gilmore calls it abandonment.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, you also need vision. I mean, I have a friend who's Black, who's a developer, who says, like Third Street Promenade was not developed overnight. You have to have years and years of planning for something and acquiring land, and and all these political things have to work. They have to be on the same page. And it just wasn't that in South Central. It just wasn't there. And to be honest, this is a little bit painful to say, but like Tom Bradley, who was the mayor then, he didn't see this coming. He was very surprised. And Tom Bradley, as much, he is vaunted as LA's first Black mayor, but and people talk about the coalition that he brought together to develop LA. Well, downtown developed on his watch. And the coalition that formed, did not benefit South Central. I mean, I'm sorry, but it didn't. So I think that that was the cost of maybe Tom Bradley doing business. I don't know. I mean, I'm being probably kind and diplomatic, but it seems like when things happen in other parts of LA, Black people just lose out. So by the time 92 came around, Tom Bradley was very taken aback. And I'll never forget, to be honest, when he left office, he didn't run for re-election, but when Nate Holden, the former councilman, when he left office, he proposed naming stretch of Crenshaw after Tom Bradley, which seemed like a no-brainer, right? Tom Bradley Boulevard from, I don't know, Adams down to Florence. There was great opposition to that idea because people, as it turns out, were not really enamored of Tom Bradley's legacy, or not of that part of it, and did not want to change the name because Tom Bradley, as much as he had accomplished, had not done a lot for Black LA. I'm not saying it was just his fault, but it's the politics of the entire city. And so that's just one complication. One thing that did happen after 92, what did we do? We changed the name of South Central to South LA. We did this Hollywood thing of let's just, rename it. I think that actually came from some of the Black politicians like Mark Ridley Thomas, who was in his first year of being councilman in the 8th district. I think people thought that was going to maybe be a catalyst for change, which sounds, really superficial right now, but there was a big push to just rebrand South Central, South LA, which I thought spoke to a real lack of any other options to do anything. Let's just, maybe if it could have attracted investment, I guess that would be okay, but it didn't. People just said, oh, okay. Instead of Kentucky Fried Chicken, it's KFC now, or some, whatever. It's just like a renaming that I actually don't like it because it's just vague and not specific, and people still say South Central anyway. But that's about that's about the only lasting change that we made, I think.
Yeah, the political scenario is messy, and it's heartening in this moment to see people like Congresswoman Bass, who's a longtime Antiochian supporter, Sidney Comlager, a longtime activist in the community, and our next state senator, Lola Smallwood Cuevas, who founded the Los Angeles Black Workers Center. That was such a concrete thing, the founding of that center that you speak to about, we need jobs, right? Communities need jobs, and they need the connectivity, the intermediaries, right? The money and the political will and that beauty vision that you're talking about, and make it concrete.
Yeah, right. And we need not just jobs now, we need meaningful jobs, right? As we know, as we've discovered during the pandemic, not just a job, but meaningful and that has potential. So yeah, that's still a big ask, but it's
so any other efforts, things I'm happy to maybe pop in something about the Black Workers Center into the chat rather, but anything else, Erin, that you'd like to call out, other work, collective efforts that people can look into after this conversation?
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to think a little bit on that. I mean, you mean collective efforts that grew out of 92?
Or not, or just what's cooking?
In terms of just anti-gentrification stuff, or just there's not a lot of, honestly, there's not a lot of, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't see, there's not a lot of anti-gentrification activism that I see in my community. I think people I think people don't quite understand it. I think it's, I think for some Black people, they understand how encroaching it is and how disruptive it is, but they also are not opposed to in some ways not opposed to the rising home values, right? We need to address that. Like, what does that mean? Like, how can it be bad to have a house that's tripled in value, right? That's part of American capitalism that people want to be part of. I think it's not well. I think the whole issue is not well explained to people, and all of a sudden they look up and realize that their neighborhood's not the same. Well, whoa, where did that come from? And so the only strategy I've heard put forth about opposing this is don't sell your house, which that's not a very effective one, because there's going to be some turnover always, and it's just temporary. It's not sustainable. And the real tragic thing is that, look, there are other ethnic groups in history, there are people, people leave their starter communities, right? Um, you start out in one neighborhood, and then if ideally you're successful, you move out to another neighborhood, but you don't lose your identity, you don't lose yourself, you don't lose your wealth. But Black people, it doesn't work for them that way. They don't just integrate, they don't integrate successfully and move up the ladder and everything's all great. That's not how it works. And in fact, the capital we do have as a collective is community. I think that is the enduring kind of capital we do have, and so we need to preserve it. So, but it's somewhat of a paradox. My father, who came here in the early 40s from Louisiana, said that, for hundreds of years, Black people have been working towards, social mobility. They fought against segregation. They fought against Jim Crow. When they finally when those housing covenants came down, people moved. But when they moved, they weakened the Black community. So that's, but no one could argue for segregation at the same time. So it's very, very complicated, and we need to look at the whole picture. But I would say at the end of the day, all Black people could agree, yes, we need to preserve community, because that is really our greatest source of capital, quote unquote.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Erin. So yeah, and it's defined in a lot of ways. It's a place to live, it's safe shelter for sure, but it's also that people can live and work in their same community, right? And they can get to their jobs safely and get to their schools safely, and that they have music and art and food that is culturally appropriate. So, and I see there's a couple of questions. I want to just make one shout out if anyone wants to add in the chat. There's a couple of great community organizations. Community Coalition is one of them, known as COCO, and Trust South LA, which is a wonderful community land trust. And so just to drop that in. Erin, we have a couple of questions. I want to just go to two of them. One question is kind of what you were talking about earlier. Tell us integration versus assimilation. I think that's a question for people. And then there was a question earlier, which I don't want to neglect, about Nipsey Hussle.
Okay. Which question? What's the question about? Just what it like the distinction between integration and assimilation?
No, my question is actually, no, it's not that. I'm wondering, do you think that integration without forced assimilation is possible? And where I'm getting this from is I work for this woman, Kim Defo, and this is from her brilliant brain, not mine. But when we talk about diversity, she's a Black woman, and she says, diversity for diversity's sake is just forced assimilation. So if you're not allowing like the cultures of the people coming into your organization or whatnot to influence the culture at large and be part and parcel of it, it's just you could use crayon markers and do the same thing. So I'm thinking about this idea of integration. Is it possible, you think? And we mentioned earlier that a lot of culture and ancestral practices were stripped from folks, right? And then also, like, I know white supremacy strips culture from white folks. So is there a possibility to like have integration, or is the idea of integration more like forced assimilation, that it will be a white neighborhood with many different, like a white cultural neighborhood with many different colored bodies there?
Yeah, I'd say that was probably more right. I would say, look, we have integration. We didn't do it. White people didn't do it. Period. Okay, they left, which means it's like once they realized they could not keep Black people or other people out of their neighborhoods, they said, okay, screw it, we're going to leave. So remember, also happened with schools. Public schools tried to integrate. That didn't happen. White people closed the schools down in the South rather than use them with Black people in them. Now that's deep. Okay, and it never happened. We are post-integrate. I hate to, integration is a wonderful idea. And I think I read a book that was called The Illusion of Integration, The Reality of Race, written like the early 90s. It found one community in the United States that naturally integrated. What you're talking about, one, or maybe I think it was Shaker Heights, Ohio, right? Where people actually decided to stay, and there was the stability, there was economic stability, and, but it was a very, very rare occurrence. In fact, that book said there's a math to this. There's a metric to this. And Richard Rothstein talks about this too in his book, Color of Law. A white neighborhood, if one Black person, speaking of diversity, which I don't like that word, it's just like PR to me. It just describes people in a room, doesn't mean anything. But in a white neighborhood, if there was one Black family, that was okay. If there was two, I wasn't as good. But there was three, there was actually a tipping point. The percentage got to be more than 10, or everybody left. It was very predictable. And it happened over and over and over. And all of you, I'm not calling anybody out, but everybody on this call right now lives, is not a product of that, but we live where we live because of that. Listen, my husband, who was white, he was Jewish, moved into Inglewood. White people don't do that. When he got here, my neighbors didn't know what the hell to think. They said, why is this white person in this neighborhood? They didn't understand. They thought he was a cop. He kind of, he's a teacher. But it wasn't done. And then they realized, oh, he's just with her. Oh, he's okay. He doesn't know better. Okay. And so it was such a rare thing and not done. And my husband's relatives didn't know what to make of it because it was simply not done. You do not move to those places, right? So I think that could there be, like meaningful integration? I think forced assimilation sounds like an oxymoron. You assimilate or you don't. But I think that we are not a country that wanted assimilation. That's not the point of America. It's unfortunate. I think the white right has it right about America. We don't want that. We never want, as a country, as a whole, never wanted assimilation / integration. It's an ideal that I love, but frankly, history is against it. Jane, there's still optimism. There's always, things can change quickly, and so it's possible. I mentioned Crenshaw just as, maybe, because it seems like the white people live in Crenshaw like it being Black. Let's just hope enough Black people left there for it to make it, that meaningful. So anyway, I think that there is, we can create a new paradigm. We need to finally achieve integration. But to be really, really honest, I would challenge anybody white to say, would you really think about moving to a neighborhood that's not mostly white? No, you wouldn't. I'm answering it for you. You wouldn't. And Black people have the same mentality. To graduate up and out and to be successful means to go to somewhere a white space. It does not mean to stay in a Black one. This is something Black people struggle with as well. So we have it all effed up, to be honest. We just do. So we have to really reorient our thinking. All of us, not just, none of us are deconditioned all the way, I think.
So thanks for that question, Erin. That brings the whole issue of the language that we use to describe our lives, our conditions, our system, our communities, and what parts of the language are useful, and what do we actually know when we say, every company now has a DEI person who's been charged with changing an institution to have diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what does that mean? Particularly when that person is very often a Black woman. And they say, okay, here, it's your job to change the culture of this institution that's been, either has been around for hundreds of years or has adopted the culture that's been around for hundreds of years of race and racism and oppression. So maybe we need lots of different words and different definitions. That's a form of activism, right? So the other question I saw, and then Asa, I'll ask you for help. I did see a question.
Yeah.
I think it was just asking, there's a question also about loss.
It was Mark was brought in Nipsey Hussle and was just asking, if you want to comment on that. I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to kind of flesh out the question a little, or say there was been a lot posted about it. So yeah, thanks, Mark.
Of course. Thank you guys for opening the format, and thank you for having it again tonight. It's so important. I'm exactly opposite of you. I'm on the East Coast, but I've had the opportunity to study and understand the needs of South Central. Is very similar here in a lot of different areas on the East Coast. Long story short, Nipsey was not only a rapper, but he was an individual that is one generation removed as a migrant to the United States. His father and mother are not from here. And long story short, they came in and they made it very clear very soon to him that things must change. He's of Ethiopian descent, and he wanted to see change happen very quickly. And in his youth, he was still able to overcome the gang violence, even though he was a part of a gang, but he was able to unite and provide the community a lot of different outlets that they didn't have before. So creative space, tech centers, tutorials for young men and young women that wanted to do something that was not the neighborhood culture, groceries, teaching people how to farm and how to create outlets for more than the junk food in their neighborhood. He was making coalitions between the gangs to where they had nonviolent hours so kids could come back and forth from school or back and forth from the library without violence. So I just think he's a very important part of the culture, very important part of the conversation. And I just wanted to know if you guys had anything else to share or any thoughts about what he accomplished while he was here. And for those that don't know, he was unfortunately, he was murdered trying to help his own neighborhood. So, but his legacy lives on. There's plenty of murals around the Crenshaw area. His strip malls still are live and vibrant. You can donate to his causes. His family has picked up the torch and moved forward with it. But that's what I wanted to ask of the panel.
Okay. I'll just say, so yeah, I'm aware of Nipsey Hussle was, although he got really, I mean, I knew a lot more about him after he was killed, unfortunately, than I did while he was alive. But I think that he's part of a tradition we call Black capitalism. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, just Black people helping their neighborhoods, right? I mean, it's something that all Black people did, certainly in the days of segregation and Jim Crow, because they were the only ones who would set up businesses, who would cater to Black folks. And there are some Black people who argue that those overall were better economic times, even with the injustice of Jim Crow. And in fact, before Nipsey Hussle, there was Magic Johnson back in the mid 90s, where he started this sort of tradition, at least in LA, of celebrities, Black celebrities kind of stepping forward to help, put their money and or name on something. In Magic Johnson's case, it was the movie theaters, right adjacent to the mall, because, one of the things we didn't have were movie theaters. So that was really, and in the beginning, Magic Johnson envisioned something bigger. He wanted to set up a whole retail center, but politically that didn't fly. He got into long fights with Mark Ridley Thomas, the council person. So it came down really to those theaters, which, by the way, I think the Pan African Film Festival is at those theaters right now as we speak. But and that's great. But and what Nipsey Hussle contributed is wonderful. But we have to realize that is not the sort of institution building, the kind of bigger progress that needs to be made in the community. It's great. It is a wonderful model for people to follow, for people to really, this is important, for residents to invest in the community. Part of the problem in LA, you can live in a beautiful neighborhood like Crenshaw and Baldwin Hills, and you can just go, but you drive your car, you go spend somewhere else. You literally don't invest in the community, right? Meaning not just spend money, but just spend time and attention and give priority to the community. In fact, a friend of mine put it this way: we don't live where we live. He was talking about Black people in LA. We don't live where we live. We live in Inglewood, but we spend all of our money on the outside, send our kids outside, because we have conditioned ourselves to believe that everything good is out there. So that's part of the problem of gentrification, although, and so people like Nipsey Hussle, and to a maybe lesser extent, Magic Johnson and Damien's grandfather and all these people, they are more than just, having a movie theater or having a business. They're showing other Black people, we can be a collective, and we are capable of great things. Okay. And I think that that's a really important model and message for now, even. Damien's downtown Crenshaw is sort of modeled after that. It's not just about setting up a store, though. It's a much bigger vision, but it's that idea that Black people do have, there's great power in collectivism, And so anyway, I'm glad to hear that Nipsey Hussle's retail is still going, but we need like 1,000 more of those.
Yeah, so that's to the ownership question also, right? It's not just ownership of a physical space or that you own a business, but ownership of the community and the local culture. And I want to shout out to Yolanda, who I see is here, ownership of the streets. So when we get into our urban studies classes, we talk about spatial justice, where there are communities that people don't feel they own the streets even because they're renting, and the police are, they're not they're warrior police, not guardian police, right? There's those two different kinds of policing, to oversimplify it. And so the streets are literally dangerous because of cars drive through, right? What's more violent than being hit by a car? But also that's a space where we have young people join gangs because they want that ownership, right? So I'm just wanting to deconstruct that a little bit. It's more than just the stores and the schools. Great. So there is that piece to it as well. I saw there was something in the chat from Angela about LASA and the jobs. And I just want to say, Angela, I don't think we have time for that because it's going in sort of another direction. So LASA is the Homeless Services Agency in the Los Angeles region. And as we know, homelessness is a huge problem. We could have gone there, right? We could have gone in that housing conversation about eviction and raising rents going up and that world of injustice. And Angela, if I can just say that I think your point is lots of people work in homeless services in Los Angeles, almost all people of color, lots of women. It's not unlike home care and healthcare, that it's a very gender valued job sector where people are not paid enough to live, but yet they are caring for others, right? And so I just think it's another conversation, Angela. But I'll ask Erin if she wants to weigh in on the homelessness and homeless services.
I think that is another conversation, an important one. But homelessness is an integral part of the housing problem. And gentrification is on that scale, right? There's gentrification, which is a housing problem to me, even if you own a house, and then at the other end, there's homelessness. So, and I don't have a statistic in front of me, but gentrification, we're all being, we all know housing is being squeezed. There's just not enough of it. It's overvalued. And so that increases homelessness. And I don't know, there's a word for people who are not homeless, but they're sort of couch surfing or living with living as if someone's doing them a favor, etc. I would say one thing I forgot to mention as maybe positive, and maybe that may help curtail gentrification, is the kind of explosion of the additional housing units that people are building, right, in their backyards to house people, so you have multiple generations that can actually live there, as opposed to everybody trying to find a home, right? Everybody trying to afford $2 million, which is not possible. I think that's overall a positive thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's great actually. And single family zoning has been one of our big impediments to lots of folks having housing. There's a question from Michael and then Clarence, and then I think we have like 1 second left. So
yeah, I just wanted to thanks. I just wanted to jump in to say it is about 5. So, but what we usually do is, we recognize that's when it officially ends, but we kind of hang out for a bit longer, and it kind of becomes a little less formal if you're willing, Erin and Jane, and so we can get to both of those questions. But I just want to recognize the official time is over now. So,
okay.
But we'll continue if that's all right for a bit.
That's after hours, right?
Yes. This is where it really goes down.
I can hang out a few more minutes.
Great.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? My question is, it's about gentrification, the government's role in it. I was curious, like, how does the government through policies facilitate or enable gentrification? And historically speaking, or even like contemporarily speaking, are those policies like visible enough to where we can actually see it? Or as a journalist, are you able to like, have you chronicled it? And what are you looking at in order to say like, you know what, there you go. And I mention that because gentrification is talked about a lot up in Seattle. I don't live in Seattle. I live down south from Seattle and Pierce. But, you know, Seattle's a liberal state, a city. Washington's a liberal states run mostly by, it's considered a blue state. It feels like Dixiecrats run this state. So I was just wondering, how does government facilitate and enable gentrification politically, policy-wise?
Good question. I'll just say, Jane, I'll let you answer that. You're probably more versed in that than I am. But I would say this goes way back, right? So the federal government guaranteed loans, home loans for white people, home loans, okay? And not for Black people. So you can start there in terms of building wealth. That's not just in Richard Rothstein's book. That's in Ta-Nehisi Coates's piece, The Case for Reparations, and he talks about the whole, you know, government involvement in. Wait, sorry. Hey, I'm sorry. That's the mailman. I'm sorry. My dog's trying to weigh in on all this. Anyway, but yeah, that's been very, very explicit in that wealth and equity that starts out from people's homes and homes that appreciate over time. So, Jane, you want to add anything to that?
Well, there's a lot there. But yeah, I mean, I would just say that in addition to what Erin said, that we've had this institutional support of big banks, for example, that have made smaller banks, community banks, public banks, and credit unions, all of which are better than the big banks in terms of supporting people locally on, you know, whether it's housing or small business loans or, you know, anything for the financial world. The government has created a space where only those big banks can thrive. And they now own a huge amount of the economy. I mean, literally 40% of the economy is financed, money moving back and forth. And how much of that filters down to communities of color? Almost none. If you walk around, you know, wherever, Culver City or Santa Monica, there's plenty of banks, built banks that you can go in and use the ATM and talk to somebody, and those don't exist in other places. But credit unions, public banks, and community banks can change that. And that's a place for, if people want a place to jump in and get busy, that's something we can support.
Yeah, also, one last really quick thing. So also it's what the government doesn't do that's harmful. So, you know, in 2008, you know, the whole housing meltdown, one thing we discovered that the subprime loans that were sold to the whole deregulated financial market, you know, that's something that they took the gloves off there. They took their hand off the controls, but the subprime loans were sold to a lot of Black people of color who didn't need them. They qualified for regular loans that wouldn't have blown up, wouldn't have melted down or jumped up. You know, the interest rates wouldn't have accelerated. So that's just one thing we found out. And so part of the problem is that there's not enough regulation of the big banks and these financial products, as they're called. And so that's a huge problem.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I think that's a really wonderful long conversation, right? To have. That's maybe race and finance is got to be on a messy conversation agenda someday. I want to see Clarence, who's been very patient, had his hand up for a while.
Actually, I don't have a question. I just had a couple of comments. First and foremost, I just want to thank you guys for bringing up the idea. I think it was perhaps someone who brought up assimilation versus integration and diversity. I just wanted to offer that some might recall Dr. Julia Hare when she said integration was the illusion of inclusion. And I always love that quote that she left us with before she passed. I also wanted to say that I am a post resident of Leimert Park. I live in the Village Green now, which is still about 5 minutes from Leimert Park. And I have watched what has happened there, even out my front door. Every Sunday morning, people who did not look like me would come by with cameras taking pictures of property to purchase. That started going on like 12 years ago before I moved here. And it became a little unsettling rather. But to understand that your community was really changing, not only gentrification based on majority population, but all of a sudden your community was Black, brown, white, and others. And you spoke on, Damon not being here and how he could have brought a certain amount of knowledge about the commercial land ownership juxtaposed to renting, et cetera, in the development of communities. So I hope we can do a part B with this, or part 2, bringing Damien in to talk about that, because one of the things I've witnessed in Leimert Park, and it's going on right at this very second, with the revitalization, I can't even talk today. I had like 3 poetry presentations yesterday for National Poetry Month, and I'm crazed. My tongue will not move as fast as my brain, so please forgive me. But what I'm trying to reference is that in Leimert Park currently, with the soon opening of the Vision Theater, which is started out to be a $22 million project, is now, it probably doubled that because of the delay and everything else. But there was a group of people, and I kind of like played footsies with them for a minute, but it was a Friends of the Vision, and they worked with the commercial owners association, whatever they're calling themselves now. Community Build is part of that. But the idea that most of those structures, those businesses that make up this illusion, I'm gonna use Dr. Hare's term, this illusion of this Black cultural hub called Leimert Park, where you have theaters and you have dance studios, and you have galleries, and you have all of this cultural influence. But very few of those structures are owned by Black people. So it's a constant struggle for those people to maintain that semblance of culture and those presentations and that livelihood of being, economic through a cultural expression. And all of the activities thereof that happen, especially on weekends, all of that is threatened because of this ownership issue of all of these commercial buildings. So I don't know if this is part of the work now of Destination Crenshaw or not, since Damon's not here to provide that for us. But, I'm just curious because I know there's a big struggle, and I don't want to publicly say which business that we all play with over there, Antioch is friends with, because there are a couple of them, but I don't want to call any names right now. But there is a continuous struggle with landlords and these cultural, warriors of ours who are presenting Black culture and are in danger every day of losing the hold of their space.
Okay, thanks, Clarence, for that. I would just say quickly, this goes back, this issue of ownership goes back a long way. It goes back to the early 90s. And there was always a discussion in Leimert Park on Degnan about merchants owning those, the storefronts. There are a couple of owners, but, realistically, like most merchants, it's a big thing to ask to expect merchants to own the land. They are small business owners, right? I think, frankly, this is my opinion. I don't think that the local leadership helped them enough. I don't think, that the council people who are Black really stepped in and helped broker something, helped facilitate that ownership, because I don't think the merchants could not do it on their own. You had to have that vision. It's that vision thing I was talking about. If you're looking at Leimert and seeing, that cultural hub that should be preserved, then to me, if you're in elected official, you should at least attempt to make that happen. That didn't happen, okay? So that's my take on it. That's my take on it. I think that it was a lot of those merchants were getting the rent they were paying were beneath market rent, and it was just hard for them to just to graduate up and actually own the property. But I think it could have been facilitated, and it was not. And that was a failure of leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Clarence. It's helpful to talk about a specific place and some place that people can picture, and maybe some Angelenos have visited Leimert Park, and it's so beautiful and so wonderful.
And please let me throw this in, since you guys mentioned this earlier, but Destination Crenshaw, which is another project, it starts in Leimert, but it stretches out down Crenshaw. And part of, I was told, I went to the opening, 2 years ago when they cut the ribbon and all that. But part of the reason that they're doing this, and Destination Crenshaw, by the way, is like a cultural installation that's going to be like public art that's going to be dispersed throughout the Crenshaw perimeter. And it is really supposedly in someone's mind is a deterrent of gentrification. Now, I don't know how that can happen because, if I were a person not of color, but say of some other nationality, Eurocentric, if I saw a beautiful piece of art, I might want to live behind it anyway. So I don't know what the idea that if you have this beautiful Afrocentric, installation on your block that you wouldn't want to buy a house there. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out at you guys.
Thank you, Clarence.
Destination Crenshaw is something the city's doing. Downtown Crenshaw is what Damien Goodman's involved with, and it's a lot more. It's more ambitious. But I just wanted to point that out. I'm gonna have to jump, you guys. I'm sorry. I have to leave.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. You've been generous with your time. Yeah.
It was great. And I hope this conversation will outlast us, Jane, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you, Erin.
Not just the conversation, but the awareness and the activity, right? And progress, because it's still, we can make, we can have a different outcome, right? LA needs to show the way.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you guys very much.
All right, we'll see you soon. So if it's okay, Asa, can I ask you to, or David,
Yes.
to sort of manage the time here?
Yeah, I think we can wrap up unless there, are any burning questions.
We should invite Yolanda to jump in.
Yolanda, if Yolanda has a question, but I also, I want to recognize Jane. If you have to run, we can wrap up soon. But maybe Yolanda, is Yolanda still on? They're off.
No.
Yeah. Is anyone? But I think we could wrap up there, unless anyone has anything else to add. Thank you so much, Jane. And I hope we can do this again. I think there was, in the chat, I saw a lot of excitement, and we kind of started the threads of, those 10 different ways we could go in this or more. And each one of them could be more than our conversation. And I hope we can do that. And maybe Damien we can invite him back.
Yes.
So thank you, Jane. Yeah.
And thank you all for being here and honoring this ongoing discussion.
Thanks, Jane.
We're really grateful to have you, Jane. Good to see you.
Wonderful conversation.
Bye, y'all, and thank you.